One statistic. Buried in a spreadsheet nobody wanted to open. And it called this entire season. Wins, losses, the playoff picture. Before a single game was played. 500 expert analysts missed it. Vegas missed it. Your favorite sports podcast missed it. But one number saw everything coming. Here's the thing about sports prediction. We've been doing it wrong for decades. We look at last season's win totals, we argue about star players, we debate coaching changes. And every year, the same thing happens. The predictions fall apart by week 6. But what if the answer was never in the obvious data? What if the most powerful predictor in modern sports analytics was hiding in a column so boring that most analysts skip right past it? Let me take you back to September of 2023. Nate Silver's FiveThirtyEight model, the gold standard of sports prediction, the one that correctly called 2 consecutive championship series, released its season projections. ESPN's Football Power Index followed. Then The Athletic's entire analytics desk weighed in. Between those 3 outlets alone, you're looking at over 500 individual game predictions. The consensus was clear, confident, and, as it turned out, spectacularly wrong about the season's 3 biggest storylines. But what happened next changed everything. A graduate researcher at MIT Sloan Sports Analytics Conference named Dr. Rajiv Menon had been quietly running a different model. Not flashier. Not more expensive. Just built around a single overlooked metric called Marginal Efficiency Rate under pressure. What insiders now call MERP. And by February, his projections had outperformed every major model by a margin that was, statistically speaking, almost impossible to explain away. Now here's where most people get the story wrong. They assume this is about finding some secret stat that nobody's ever heard of. Some wizardly new algorithm cooked up in a basement. It's not. MERP had been sitting in public datasets for 7 years. 7 years. The data was always there. The question was why nobody treated it as the leading indicator it actually was. Because the answer to that question reveals something uncomfortable about how the entire sports analytics industry operates. And it's not flattering. Let's talk about what MERP actually measures. Traditional efficiency metrics tell you how well a team performs on average. Points per possession. Turnover differential. Yards after contact. All useful. All backward-looking. MERP does something different. It measures how efficiently a team executes specifically in high-leverage moments when their performance variance is at its peak. Think of it like the difference between knowing a surgeon's average procedure time versus knowing their complication rate during the 5% of surgeries that go sideways. The average is fine. The pressure performance tells you everything. And when Dr. Menon ran MERP scores for every team entering this season, 3 teams stood out as catastrophically overvalued by the public. All 3 were predicted to be contenders. All 3 collapsed before Thanksgiving. Meanwhile, 2 teams with mediocre traditional metrics, teams that ESPN's Football Power Index had ranked outside the top 12, were posting MERP scores in the top 3 historically. Both made the playoffs. One is now 2 wins from a championship. But here's the detail that should make every analyst in America deeply uncomfortable. The sports data company Pro Football Focus had actually flagged MERP-adjacent data in a 2021 research paper. The paper was downloaded fewer than 800 times. 800. A mid-tier recipe blog gets more traffic than that. The entire industry looked at that paper and scrolled past it because it didn't fit the narrative anyone was selling. And that's the real story here. Not the stat itself. The incentive structure that buried it. Sports analytics in 2024 is a content business before it's a knowledge business. Analysts aren't just researchers. They're personalities. They're building brands. And the cold, quiet, contrarian finding that takes 3 paragraphs of statistical context to explain. It doesn't go viral. It doesn't drive subscriptions. The loud, confident, star-driven prediction does. Even when it's wrong. Especially when it's wrong, because then you can come back next week with a hot take about what happened. Now let's get specific about this season, because this is where it gets genuinely wild. Going into Week 1, the San Francisco 49ers, the Baltimore Ravens, and the Miami Dolphins were the 3 most consensus picks to dominate. Combined public backing in major prediction markets. Over 68% of all championship bets. Their MERP scores entering the season? Ranked 18th, 22nd, and 26th respectively out of 32 teams. The model wasn't just slightly skeptical. It was screaming. Meanwhile, the Detroit Lions and the Philadelphia Eagles, teams getting moderate mainstream respect but not top-tier love, had MERP scores ranked 2nd and 4th. Dr. Menon's model gave Detroit a 41% probability of reaching the championship game. The consensus Vegas line implied something closer to 12%. That gap, 29 percentage points, is not statistical noise. That is a systematic blind spot, and it played out exactly the way the data said it would. Here's the part nobody saw coming, even the people who knew about MERP. The metric didn't just predict which teams would succeed. It predicted the specific type of game situations where the overvalued teams would break down. 3 of the 5 most watched collapses this season, the moments that broke fan bases, that flooded social media, that became the defining images of this year's football, happened in precisely the game states MERP had flagged as each team's critical vulnerability. The stat wasn't just right about outcomes. It was right about how. That's a different level of predictive power entirely. So why does this matter beyond one season? Because we're at an inflection point in sports analytics. The first wave, the Moneyball era that Michael Lewis wrote about in 2003, was about using any data at all when your competitors used gut instinct. That advantage is gone. Every team has a data department now. Every front office has analysts. The second wave was about having better data. More sensors. Faster processing. That advantage is shrinking fast. The third wave, and this is where MERP lives, is about asking better questions of the data that already exists. It's about intellectual courage. The willingness to publish the boring, contrarian finding even when the algorithm says your engagement will tank. Dr. Menon submitted his MERP findings to 3 major sports analytics journals before they were accepted. 3 rejections. The feedback on 2 of them literally cited the metric as not commercially viable as a narrative framework. A peer reviewer for a sports science journal told a researcher that his finding wasn't commercially viable. That sentence should stop you cold. Because it tells you everything about why sports analytics, despite all its sophistication, all its processing power, all its brilliant people, still gets the big predictions wrong at a rate that should embarrass the industry. The model was always there. The data was always there. Somebody just had to care more about being right than about being interesting. And that somebody was a graduate student in a Boston office in September, building a spreadsheet that 500 experts didn't think was worth opening. One stat changed the entire narrative of this season. Not because it was secret. Not because it was magic. Because the person running it asked a different question. The question